Hello BookTube, hello friends, welcome to LizziefayeLovesBooks. I'm Elizabeth, and in this video I'd like to do my January wrap-up. I finished a total of 23 books for the month of January, and I started 3 others that I carried over into the month of February. One of them is a devotional book, which I'll be reading all year. That's this C.S. Lewis book called A Year with C.S. Lewis. And the other 2 books that I carried over that I didn't finish, oddly enough, were both audiobooks. One of them I barely started, and I decided just to start it over for Tom Topple because I realized that it's over 500 pages, and that is Shell Game by Ridley Pearson. This is book 5 in the Kingdom Keeper series. Then the other one is for one of my book clubs, and it's the book club that meets outside the library, and we're kind of on a hiatus right now, so I have extra time to finish this, but I'm just having a hard time getting into it, and the CDs don't work very well in my car. But it's by Nicholas Sparks. It's called Every Breath, and I'm about half done with it at this point, and there's only 8 CDs, so I really don't have that much left to listen to, but I'm gonna have to listen to it in my house, and I don't know, I've just lost interest in it. I may or may not get it done. I may just DNF it. I know some of you guys are probably out there going, if you don't like it, don't finish it. But since it's for book club and we haven't yet met to talk about it, I think I will try to finish it, but it's just taking me some time. I think if it was on my phone and I could speed it up, I would have gotten through it by now. But because it's on CD and the CDs don't work in my car, that's just making, it's just making it more difficult, but I will get to it. If you've read this, let me know what you thought of it. So for the books I finished, 5 of them were nonfiction, and 5 of them were middle grade, 4 of them were mysteries, and 3 of the 4 were cozy mysteries, and 1 was not. Then 4 were romances, and then the other 5 books were just miscellaneous fiction. So altogether, that totals 23. Now, outside of that, 3 of the 23 books were Christmas-themed books. I don't mind finishing up some Christmas books in the month of January. I've even been known to go on into February or other parts of the year and read Christmas books. January is still close enough to December that in my mind it's still perfectly fine to be reading Christmas books in the month of January. So let's start with the nonfiction. I wanted to start the year out with something uplifting. And on Hoopla, I found an inspirational audiobook called None Like Him, 10 Ways God is Different from Us by Jen Wilkin. And I did really enjoy this. It was not very long, and it was very inspirational and uplifting, and I would recommend it. Then after that, I wanted to listen to something that would be self-motivating, self-help, something in the organizing field. So the book I picked was by Joshua Becker called The More of Less, Finding the Life You Want Under Everything You Don't. This is a book about minimizing and a minimalist lifestyle. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to embrace a minimalist lifestyle, but I do certainly have some areas of my home and life that need to be decluttered. So things like that can be motivating to me. Sometimes I think they take it a little too far, and then I'm like rolling my eyes, but for the most part, I do really enjoy organizing books or books of this type that do give me some motivation to get started with projects like this. Then the third one that I listened to right after New Year was called The Disorganized Mind, Coaching Your ADD Brain to Take Control of Your Time, Tasks, and Talents. It was by Nancy Rady, and this was really good. I'm realizing more and more as I get older that I definitely have undiagnosed ADD, not necessarily ADHD, but I'm very easily distracted, and I have a hard time finishing one task from beginning to end all at the same time. I tend to flit from one task to another, and then a lot of things don't get finished, and I have a hard time starting things. I think that speaks to more of my perfectionist tendencies, but anyway, I have all these challenges to overcome in order to get anything done. So I really enjoy books like this because they do seem to get me and help me move on from that point. So later on in the month, I listened to The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. This is by Margareta Magnusson. I heard some other booktuber talking about this not that long ago, and I thought, oh, that sounds really good, because even though it sounds a bit morbid, you really do have to think about these things at some point. How am I leaving things for those people who are going to be left behind when I'm gone? And after having cleaned out my mother's house and taken on a lot of that myself, I have begun to really feel strongly about the fact that I've got to take care of my stuff and get my mom's keepsakes in order enough that my own kids and other family members, left behind after me, will be able to make sense of what's been kept and be able to know what's important to keep. So I thought this was a very good book. It's very short. It's on audio. I listened to this, I think, on Scribd, and I thought it was very good. I would definitely recommend it. And then the last nonfiction book that I finished on the last day of the month was a little devotional book that has 31 devotionals. It's called An Apple a Day by Carla Dornacher, and this was just a lovely, delightful little book. I don't even know where I got this. My mom may have given it to me. I'm not really sure. It has some really sweet artwork, and I really enjoyed the devotionals. I thought maybe I would read this and pass it on, but I could see myself reading this at least once a year in any given month during the year. I just thought it was delightful, and I really enjoyed the devotionals. There's also recipes and other tidbits of things. It's all related back to apples, and I really did love it. Next, let's talk about the middle grade books that I read in January. My favorite middle grade book that I read in January was Elephant Secret by Eric Walters. This is one of the Sunshine State Young Reader Award finalists for this school year, and I loved it. As the title would tell you, this is about elephants, and it was so good. I really, really enjoyed it. There's a bit of a twist in the second half that is a little far-fetched, that you may or may not think is appropriate, or that you may or may not like, but overall I thought that the treatment of elephants in this book was very well done. The family dynamic is beautiful, and I just really, really enjoyed it. It's about a young girl and her father who own an elephant sanctuary. The mom passed away when giving birth to the daughter, so she's never really known her mom, and she's never really been allowed to talk about her or ask questions about her. And so that discussion finally comes up in this book, and the elephants themselves are just such interesting animals to read about and to learn about. I feel like that there was a good deal of research done to write this book. It's not that it's sciencey. In fact, it's almost borders on science fiction, but it was definitely a very entertaining book, and if you like elephants at all, then I would recommend it. If you saw my video where I talked about my 2020 reading goals, I talked about different lists that I want to read from each month. So one of the lists is to read a book from the series of unfortunate events each month, and I accomplished that goal in January. I read The Reptile Room, which is book 2 in the series of unfortunate events. When this book starts out, you think, okay, this is going to go well, but of course it doesn't, and the author pretty much warns you of that in the beginning of all of these books, that if you're looking for a book or a series of books where everything ends happy, then this may not be the book series for you. But it's all done in a kind of a lighthearted way. Even though it's dark, it's still entertaining, and it's really kind of a unique concept, I think, for children's books. So I am planning to continue to read this series and hopefully finish it by the end of the year. Another one of my lists is to read a Newbery winner each month, and this month I read Up a Road Slowly by Irene Hunt. This was a Newbery winner in the 60s, and I don't know why this one hasn't gotten more love and had more longevity than some of the others, because I thought this was fantastic. It's about a young girl whose mother passes away, and she and her brother are sent to live with an aunt. Their older sister stays with the father because she is almost done with high school and is about to go out on her own. So she stays with the father because she doesn't need as much parenting, I guess, at that point. So we get to follow the girl in her new life where she is with her aunt, and everything that she goes through, and all of the hardships and the trials with just adjusting to a new place and living without her mom and things like that. And I just thought it was a beautiful story. I can't even remember a lot of the details right now, but I remember thinking, this is really good. And if you are a Newbery reader and you haven't gotten to this one yet, then it's on Hoopla on audio, and I would definitely recommend it. I had a couple of series that I carried over into January that I had hoped to finish. One I did finish, and in the other trilogy I got the second book read, and so I've still got to read that third book at some point. I read book 2 in the Just Ella series by Margaret Peterson Haddix. I actually listened to this on audio on a playaway. This is called Palace of Mirrors. At first I didn't think it was a continuation of the story from Just Ella, and Ella is only a side character in this book. There is a different main character, but you just have to read a little ways into it to get the connection and see how it all goes together. So this is about a young girl who is living in a cottage being raised by an older woman, and there is a man from the royal court who comes to tutor her periodically, and he has been telling her her whole life that she is a princess, but she has to be in hiding. And so she's always believed that, and I don't really want to give too much away, but she ends up finding out that there are, I think, 11 other girls in the kingdom who have been told the same thing, and no one knows who the real princess is, because the real princess is being hidden so that she is not killed. So it all comes about, you figure it all out. I thought it was a fun story. It did get quite a few negative reviews, at least from some of my Goodreads friends that didn't like it. But I thought it was entertaining. It's just that at first you had to kind of figure out what was happening. And I did think at first that it was going to be an obvious conclusion, but it wasn't. There were some twists and things that came about, and it did not end like you would think it would. So if you've ever read Just Ella and you want to continue the trilogy, I think this is worth reading. It's not especially long, and I thought it was entertaining enough to continue with the trilogy. So now I've got one more to read. I can't find it on audio, so it may be a little while before I get to it, but at least I have gotten this one done. Then the last of the middle grade books, I have already returned to the library, but while I was sitting in my car about to put the book in the book slot, I filmed a few seconds of that book, so let me go to that footage now, and then I'll be back. Hello BookTube, it's me from the past. I'm going to insert this footage into my January wrap-up, but right now it is not quite the end of the month, and Emily and I are on the way to Orlando to the hospital. She's doing okay, but because her seizures have not gone away or stopped as much as we had hoped since the surgery, they want her to come back in and do another EEG and possibly tweak her medicine, do some changes, maybe some major changes, I don't know. And it's always safer to do that in a hospital environment. So I've got a few books that I've already read that I was going to include in my January wrap-up, but they're due back at the library probably before we get back from the hospital, because we're going to be there for a few days. So I thought I would just stop right now. There is a drop box that's behind me. You probably can't see it from here. I'm at a tourist information center that's right on the edge of our county, and it's right on the way to the highway to get to the hospital. So I'm going to drop these books into the slot, but before I do, I thought I would just talk about them briefly. I don't have a lot to say about this one. This is Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper. This is book 5 in the Dark is Rising sequence, and I enjoyed the series to an extent, but I did have a hard time really getting into all of the stories. It was a little tough to keep my mind on it, especially the ones that I listened to on audio. I remember the first one I listened to the first time, I didn't remember anything, and so I came back and I listened to it again probably a couple of times before I moved on to the second book. Now the second book I read in print, and I was able to understand it quite a bit better. Then the third book I listened to on audio, and I again had to go back and repeat some parts of it before I really understood what was happening. I think sometimes the scenes would change or the characters would change and I didn't realize it, and then I would lose track of what was happening in the story. Then book 4 I had read before, and it's the Newbery winner. It's called The Gray King, and even though the first time through was on audio, this time was in print, and it really made a lot more sense in print. So I probably should have just read this one in print also, but I just didn't want to take the time right now. So I listened to it on audio. I had hoped to get to it in December and I didn't. So I listened to it in early January. This is called Silver on the Tree, and it's really just the final battle. It's the final confrontation of the light and the dark before the dark is defeated. So it involves several children because these are middle grade books. It's set in England. It has ties to authorial legends. In fact, the main adult character, he's immortal, and he knew King Arthur, may have even been related to him in some way. And so he's part of a group called the Old Ones, and then there's another kid who we meet in book 2 who is the youngest of the Old Ones. And they also enlist the help of a group of kids, and they all work together on these quests throughout each book. And it's a pretty entertaining series, but it's kind of deep, I think. They do have the whole theme of good versus evil, and they are tied to the legend of King Arthur. And so if you have a kid who's interested in that, or if you're an adult who reads middle grade books and you like to read books that have ties to the authorial legends, then you would perhaps enjoy this series. And if you like to read Newbery winners, I will tell you that the Newbery winner, the Grey King, makes much more sense if you have read the rest of the series. So I don't really have much to say about this particular book because it's the 5th in the series, but it is the last standoff between good and evil before evil finally is defeated. And so that's really all I can tell you about Silver on the Tree by Susan Cooper. Another book I started at the beginning of the month and I just finished it yesterday is Hark the Herald, Angels Slay by Vicki Delaney. This is book 3 in the year-round Christmas mystery series. It's a cozy mystery series that takes place in the town of Rudolph, New York, which is basically a town that's themed for Christmas. They celebrate Christmas twice a year, and the first 2 books both take place at Christmas time within a couple of weeks of each other, and this book takes place in the summertime. They are having their Christmas parade in July, and Santa is making an appearance. The main character, Mary, owns a little gift shop in Rudolph. Her father is the one who plays Santa, and he's very Santa-like. And the magazine that our main character, Mary, used to work for has come to town to do a feature story on Rudolph and what Rudolph has to offer. And then one of the people from the magazine is murdered in Mary's shop, so of course she becomes entangled in the murder and helping to solve it, and it goes from there. I enjoyed this a lot. I have really enjoyed this whole series so far and will definitely continue reading it. Okay, I'm back. So while I was in my car, I told you about Hark the Herald, Angels Slay, which was one of the mysteries that I read during the month of January. I also listened to 2 other cozy mysteries on Hoopla. They were part of the Coffee House Mystery Series by Cleo Coyle. I listened to book 5 in the series, Decaffeinated Corpse, and I listened to French Pressed, which is book number 6. I have the next one already checked out from Hoopla, and I'll be listening to it. And then the one after that is a Christmas-themed book. So I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to hold off and wait until Christmas to listen to that one, or just go ahead and plow through the series, which is kind of what I had in mind to do anyway, because this is a series that's taken up a lot of space on my shelf. I don't think I want to keep them once I listen to the ones that I can get on audio. And so I feel like I ought to just go ahead and hang on to them while I'm listening to them, but then I can move them off my shelves. So more than likely, I'm just going to go ahead and plow through them and listen to at least 2 or 3 or 4 a month until I get them done. So these are the 2 that I got done in January. The other mystery that I listened to in January was not cozy. This is actually book 10 in a series, and I have not read the first 9 books. We picked this for book club. It's called Almost Midnight by Paul Dwarin, and Dwarin is how you pronounce this name, which is spelled D-O-I-R-O-N. There is quite a lengthy essay on his website about how to pronounce his name and all the different ways it's been mispronounced, and it's pretty humorous. You can tell the guy is a good writer just by what he wrote about how to pronounce his name. So anyway, this is a series about a game warden in Maine, and I thought the story was really good. Now, we discussed this in my January book club. One of the mysteries in this book is surrounding a wolf, and he was shot. He did survive, but the main character is trying to figure out who shot him. And there was quite a large storyline about the wolf and wolves in general. And one of the ladies in our group said, I didn't like all that about the wolves. I didn't care about all of that. I just wanted to hear about the other mystery. And yet I personally thought the wolf mystery was the most interesting. So it really just depends on what you like and what you're drawn to. There was, of course, a murder of a human, maybe even two, in the book, and it was all woven together, of course, and I thought that it was really good, but there was a good bit of foul language that I didn't care for. You guys know I'm always harping on that, but other than that, I really didn't have any issues with the book. I thought that it was a good story, and I would probably read more from the story. The first book in the series is called The Poacher's Son, and I believe that that's referring to the main character. There was a few things he talked about in here in reference to his father not being a good person, and so I have a feeling that his father was a poacher. So him being a game warden, that's would kind of clash. So anyway, it is a series I'm interested in reading more of, perhaps. Didn't diminish my enjoyment for me to step in book 10. I felt like this is probably a series that you could jump around in and be just fine. Alright, so let's talk about the romances that I listened to. Two of them were for the Audible Escape Challenge. Now, I never did a January TBR. I didn't officially draw out choices for the Audible Escape Challenge. If you've been following along with me and listening to the categories that I have been drawing out, I did draw out kind of at the last minute urban and LGBTQIA. So I'll tell you what I listened to for that, and now it's already February, so it's too late for me to say, okay, read these for January, but you can always, pick up those at the end, because I think to finish all 41 categories, we only have to go through like September, so you can always pick them up at the end of the challenge. So for urban, the book I listened to was called Alita's Way. It was by Giselle Loomis. I started out really loving this. It was a really strong female character. She was such a strong character in the beginning that I wanted her to be strong all the way through, and she just gave it all up. That part disappointed me. Anyway, it started out good, and then it kind of went south, but it wasn't bad in the long run. Then for the LGBTQIA, I listened to Baby It's Cold by Josh Lanyon. If you're like me and this is not really your comfort zone area, this is a good short book to listen to just to meet that challenge. It's just a little bit flirty. There's no big sex scenes or anything like that. But it's one that I think is good to meet that challenge, and it was really short. It was about a young man who wanted to reconnect with his ex, and he's a chef, and so he makes up a story that he's been hired to cook this dinner for his ex, so that, and he's got some surprise person coming who's hired him to cook this dinner, but there's really no surprise person coming. It's really just him. But then a surprise person does show up who's also interested in the ex. So it's kind of a triangle thing, and like I said, it was not graphic at all. The other two romances were both Christmas-themed books. I listened to Christmas at Sea by Melody Carlson. I thought this was pretty good. I first saw Oshina talking about this one, and she didn't really like it. I'm not really sure what she didn't like about it, but the thing that did sort of grate on you after a little while is that the mom was keeping something from the son, and it didn't feel like she had a big enough motivation for keeping that from him. It just seemed a little bit contrived. So maybe that's what Oshina didn't like about it. I'm not really sure. I can't remember at this point. But it wasn't a bad story overall. I think the romance was a little quick. It is a short book, so if you're going to have a romance in a short book, it kind of has to be quick. But overall, I thought it was a decent book. It's by Melody Carlson, who I have read and enjoyed before. And, it was a fun little Christmas-themed read. And then an author that I love is Debbie Macomber. This is her newest Mrs. Miracle book, and I think her newest holiday book. This is called A Mrs. Miracle Christmas, and in this book, instead of Mrs. Miracle taking care of children, she has become a caregiver for an elderly person. And this elderly aunt of the young couple in our story are also disappointed because they're unable to have a baby, and so far they've been unable to adopt a child either, to the point where the wife has really just completely given up and she doesn't want to even talk about it. The husband really wants to continue to try to adopt, and it makes the wife think that she's not enough for him. If he continues to want a baby, then she must not be enough on her own, and she gets just beside herself with all this anger and anxiety whenever he even brings it up. And I thought that part was a little bit over the top. I mean, she got to the point where it was like a mental illness that you couldn't even touch on the topic of adoption, and she would just start writhing. So I don't know, I've never been in that situation, so I don't know if it's possible to be that over the top upset when someone mentions anything to do with adoption or childbirth. I just thought it was a little much, but I still enjoyed the story. Mrs. Miracle is a delightful character. If you've never read any Mrs. Miracle books, she is an angel on earth and does some really sweet things and wonderful things for people, and it is a really neat series. Now, it is lumped in with all of the angelic intervention books written by Debbie May Kimber. There is a set of angels called Shirley, Goodness, and Mercy that appear in some of Debbie's other books, and they also make an appearance in this book. So that's kind of fun. I haven't read any of the Shirley, Goodness, and Mercy books, but they are on my TBR list to read one of these days. And I had 5 other miscellaneous fiction books that I finished during the month of January. One of them was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I did not care for this at all. There was teenagers having sex, there was abortion, there was just all kinds of things that I don't condone or want to read about, and it just really wasn't my kind of book. 2 books I did really enjoy were 2 books by Marie Bostwick. Now, these are kind of related, but they're sort of separate series if you look at them on Goodreads. They're both sort of a part of the Cobbled Court series. A Part of the Seams is the last book in that series. Each book has different main characters, but they're all centered around this group of ladies and a quilt shop. Now, one of the ladies that we meet early on in the books, her name is Mary Dell. She was such a popular character that Marie went back and wrote her prequel story, and that's what this one is. So this is labeled as Book 0 in the Cobbled Court series. It's also labeled as Book 1 in the Too Much Texas series, which only has 2 books, whereas the Cobbled Court series has 7 books, not including this one. So this is called Between Heaven and Texas, and this goes through Mary Dell's story from birth all the way up and through her marriage and giving birth to her child, which we've met in the other books. And she is just a very colorful character. She's from Texas, and she's a quilter, and it's just really a delightful book. My sister was the one that got me into reading these in the first place, and I'm pretty sure she said that this one is her favorite of all of the Cobbled Court books. Now, already in February, I have listened to the second book in the Too Much Texas duology, which is called From Here to Home. So now I have finished everything that's related to Cobbled Court at this point. If she writes any more, then I'll be caught up. So I thought I'd just go ahead and show you this one now, since I've already finished it. I didn't like this one quite as much as the first one, but all of them are really, really good. The overarching theme is women's friendships and strong female characters and their successes and heartaches and romances and everything. You know, all of that is rolled into each one of the books. Now, in a few places I have seen these listed as Christian books. Now, I think the author probably is a Christian, but I would not classify these as Christian books, especially not this one. I mean, there's some swearing in here, there's a little bit of sexy times, there's things like that that I would not put in a Christian book. But of course, Christians mess up just as much as anyone else does. So, you know, it's true life stuff. But your typical Christian book, if there are bad things that happen, then there's going to be some remorse and some repentance involved in that book, whereas this didn't have that. So anyway, they're definitely very, very good books. For the most part, very clean, just not squeaky clean, I guess would be a good way to say it. And definitely would fall into the category of what I would call comfort reads, women's fiction, books that I think are definitely worth picking up. And speaking of books that are worth picking up, I read another Miss Read book in January. I read Miss Claire Remembers. Now, I didn't read it out of this edition. I had another library copy that also included a copy of Emily Davis, which is a different book in the Fairacre series. We do learn in this book who Emily Davis is. She was a childhood friend of Miss Claire's and a lifelong friend of hers, but this is mainly about Miss Claire and her life story. We meet Miss Claire earlier in the Fairacre books because she is a school teacher who is getting ready to retire. She's teaching alongside Miss Read in Village School, which is the first book in the Fairacre series. And so in this book, we get to go back and take a look at her life from being born in Kexley and moving to Beach Green and then eventually teaching in Fairacre. So it's a delightful book, as all of the books by Miss Read are, and I would definitely recommend reading this whole series if you haven't started it. And the last book I listened to in the month was a chunker. I listened to Streets of Laredo by Larry McMurtry. This is the final book chronologically in the Lonesome Dove series. It's the second book that was published, so I'm reading them in publication order. This is the continuing story of Cull and what he does after Lonesome Dove. He becomes a bounty hunter. He ends up roping P.I. into helping him, and I just thought it was a really good story. Maybe not quite as compelling as Lonesome Dove, but if you enjoyed Lonesome Dove, then I think it's definitely worth picking up. Since I've already mentioned one book in a series that I've already listened to in February, I may as well go ahead and mention this one. It was the first book that I picked up in February and listened to on audio. I have purchased this whole series on Audible with my credits. This is Dead Man's Walk by Larry McMurtry, and this is the first prequel in the Lonesome Dove series. So in this book we have Cull and Gus. This is an early story of them as young men, as Texas Rangers, and some of the hardships that they endured. I'm really curious about the setting where they were. I'm pretty sure this takes place in Texas, but I don't know that area of Texas well enough to really picture it in my mind. There is quite a bit of graphic violence in this book. This is not an easy book to get through. There's a lot of stomach sickening things that happen in this book. It's not very long. The reason I went ahead and picked it up early in the month is because the very last book is over 500 pages. I think it's like 750 pages, and I wanted to be ready for it for Tom Topple. So that's why I wanted to go ahead and get through this one early in the month and then be done with the series by the time Tom Topple is done. So I still really enjoyed the book, but this one had a lot more graphic violence in it than I think the other two did. Maybe that's not accurate, but this is a shorter book, so it was compacted into fewer pages maybe, but still part of the series, and I think it's a very good, compelling series to read. So that is everything that I read or listened to in the month of January, as well as 2 books that I listened to in February. And I had a really good reading month. I enjoyed what I read for the most part, and I have already started out February with a bang. I finished 4 audiobooks in the first 6 days of the month, and now on the 7th of the month I have started reading some Laura Ingalls Wilder books for my Little House Readathon, and once I get done with that I will pick back up with my lists of things that I'm reading from, and hopefully very soon I will do kind of a what else I'm reading in February and go over what I'm reading in each of my lists and things like that. So that's all for this video. I hope you are having a great day. Read a good book, and God bless you.